Saturday, June 22nd, 2019 is a date UConn fans will fondly remember for years and years to come. It's the day that news broke that the Huskies were headed back home to the Big East. 5 days later, Gino Auriemma, Dan Hurley, and then UConn president Susan Herbst made it official in a ceremony at Madison Square Garden, the Mecca, and UConn's unofficial second home. I'm Noam Watt, and on today's episode of the Students of Storrs podcast, sponsored by Gansett Wraps, I'm joined by Dom Amore, the UConn men's basketball beat writer at the Hartford Courant, and longtime sports reporter, as well as my roommate, Matt Goepfert, who works for UCTV, to discuss what the move back home means for the UConn men's basketball program. So without any further ado, episode 6 of the Students of Storrs podcast starts right now. Matt and Dom, thank you so much for joining me today. This is going to be a great episode. First of all, Dom, how are you doing? Where are you, and how are you staying busy?
Well, I'm home in Brantford right now, waiting out this crazy storm that's, I'm afraid, going to knock out power before we're done here. One thing about even though sports has stopped, I'm basically doing my typical off-season stuff for UConn men's basketball. They've already made some news. 2 players have transferred out. One is transferred in. Another one's going to transfer in soon. 2021 recruiting is going to be on the table fairly soon as well. So it's really just a typical off season, except for the fact that to do other stories, I really have to scramble and get people on the phone as opposed to, let's say, going to a Yard Goats game or going to a UConn baseball game. So it's not that much different for me than a typical off season, but obviously, like everyone else, I'm cooped up and a little tired of being cooped up.
Right, absolutely. And Matt, how about you?
Yeah, I'm home on Long Island. School is enough of a handful to keep me busy, but eventually you get tired of that and playing little video games, and you get tired of that, and then you move on to Netflix, and then you get tired of that, and the cycle just seems to repeat itself every day. So that's what I've been doing.
Right, well, hopefully us talking some UConn men's basketball today will be a good respite from the normal for both of you guys. Now, Dom, I want to start with you. Do you remember what you were doing on June 22nd, which is the day that news first broke that UConn was going back to the Big East?
Yeah, I was actually on a plane to North Carolina. I was going for a weekend trip there to receive an award from uh, the media. I was receiving a Connecticut Sports Writer of the Year award, and so I was on a plane in the morning when that broke. And I think, like a lot of people, wondered at first if it was a hoax, but then our it kind of emanated from the Travelers, people at the Travelers, and so our reporters there were able to confirm it. And then when I landed, I called Jim Calhoun to talk to him and contribute that to our coverage that day. And then I started to work on a story about it that ran a few days later. But yeah, I was expecting to have that weekend off, as it always seems to happen when the biggest news broke, and then I had to kind of catch up and contribute what I could.
So going down to North Carolina, you didn't have any suspicions that this news was going to break?
Not the day before, no. This had been talked about, as you guys know, for quite a while because it made so much sense to do it from UConn's standpoint. The idea that the football could not be any worse if it was out of the American, and obviously you would save the basketball or really help the basketball. So it made a lot of sense from the UConn standpoint. You kept hearing that the Big East wasn't interested in expanding, although you kind of felt like if UConn was the possibility, they would be into it, which they were. But no, whether it's something from what we understand really picked up a lot of speed very quickly within a week or two of when it was announced.
Right, yeah, that's what Commissioner Val Ackerman has said. There was, a little bit of discussion, but it was really from the conclusion of that basketball season, and then things just quickly picked up steam early summer, and then boom, 5 days later, that Thursday, Madison Square Garden ceremony, a lot of UConn fans flocked to the arena. Did you get a chance to be at that ceremony? And if so, what was it like?
Yeah, no, I was at the Garden for it, and there was just a lot of elation on the part of UConn folks who were there. Susan Herbst and Dan Hurley and Gino Auriemma were just elated by it, and of course, particularly Dan Hurley, because this is not something that he bargained for when he took the job. It's like something that just made a job that he wanted and a job that he sought that much better. So it was almost for him like getting a better job overnight. And and if you just know where Dan is from and where he wants to recruit from, it completely changed. It was a game changer for UConn. You knew that it was going to be because he doesn't have to defend the conference to recruits anymore like he did in the American. So there was just a lot of elation all the way around. And I was at an event down the street for alumni afterward where David Benedict and Gino and Dan Hurley appeared, and a tremendous amount of elation there among UConn alumni in New York City. So it was just a very very happy day, one that made so much sense. You almost figured it would never happen because it made so much sense. But the right heads prevailed and it happened.
I think that's such an interesting point that Hurley didn't know about it when he signed his contract. And it's just like you said, it's such an added bonus. And for a guy from New Jersey who wants to recruit Northeast tough nosed guys to his program, it adds so much. Like you said, he doesn't have to convince people that, oh, playing in the American isn't so bad. Now he says, look, you're going to get to play at Madison Square Garden every single March on a national spotlight. And the results are showing already. Now, Matt, I know you've been watching a ton of film recently of the Big East teams from this past season. But before we get into any of that, I want to hear from a student's perspective what it means that UConn is going back into the Big East.
It's absolutely electric. Being that I'm out of state and I didn't really follow UConn basketball before coming here and then finding out this is the American Conference. Kind of like for me, I had to learn what is Tulane, what are some of these schools, and then to go back to the Big East, and it's like a shot of adrenaline. It's like you get to play all these big time games against big time teams. And obviously, you get to play in Madison Square Garden. I'm definitely prepping to skip classes to go to the tournament if I have to. It's so exciting knowing that the student section is gonna be filled for a lot of your home games. Uh, that's also obviously huge, and it's just overall just pure excitement.
Definitely can second that. And I think that what you said about skipping classes, I know hopefully our professors don't hear this, but there's going to be some games, Providence on a Thursday night, maybe that's going to be a game that it's going to be worth it to drive into Providence and go to that game. Maybe St. John's on a Thursday night. You never know. St. John's could be a good team. It might be worth it to get to Madison Square Garden for that game and you'll miss a couple classes. Now, guys, before we move into some more on-court analysis of the conference, I do want to take a moment to remind you that Gansett Wraps is still open for business. Located at 12 Royce Circle in Storrs, they're offering curbside pickup as well as delivery service during the normal hours. Please consider supporting a local business during these hard times. For more information, head to www.gansett.wraps.com. Check them out on Facebook or download the Gansett Wraps app. Now we're going to move into some analysis of the conference. Dom, I want to hear how the conference has changed since UConn left, which was primarily a football move back in 2013. You got to cover those last few moves before the last few years before the move. Could you sense any tension within the conference or an impending fracturing at any point?
This is a new conference from the conference that UConn left. In fact, UConn didn't really leave the Big East. The Big East left UConn. What had happened was, and this is kind of an unfair perception, even within the language of the contract of UConn's return. I think is kind of misrepresented a little bit. UConn got into the football business to help the Big East. UConn got into the football business so that Boston College and Miami and West Virginia and all of those schools would have a real conference to play in rather than leave for football reasons. So UConn, it was the Big East that kind of pulled UConn into the football business. And then Boston College and Miami and Virginia Tech pulled the plug in 2002 or 2004, whenever that was. and that damaged the foundation. And then Syracuse and Pittsburgh left, and that crushed it. That's not UConn's fault. None of that was UConn's fault. But now they have football, and they're in this conference, and they just went to the Fiesta Bowl. So dropping football in 2012 would have been unthinkable. And so the Big East went and started pulling all these schools in, Tulane and Tulsa, and it got Central Florida willy nilly to have a football and basketball conference. That was the only thing UConn could do was stay in that. And really the Americans saved UConn because there was nowhere else for them to go. But meanwhile, the basketball only schools, the 7 Catholic schools, they bolted and formed their own conference and bought the Big East name to use it. They added in Xavier and Butler and Creighton for a nice little 10-team conference that succeeded better than the American Conference did, at least in basketball. So this is a new conference that UConn is joining with 7 of the old rivals in place, really 4 or 5 of the really true old Big East rivals in place, but no Syracuse, no Pittsburgh, no Louisville, and some of the other schools that had made the Big East toward the end of its run, the most powerful conference really in the country. So it's a different conference, and it allows UConn to renew its old rivalries with Providence, St. John's, Georgetown, Villanova, Seton Hall, and the other schools in it like Marquette and Butler. UConn has history with Xavier. I think UConn's going to form rivalries with them pretty quickly because in Connecticut, the fans I think embrace any Big East team as a rival in a way that they just didn't do in the American. So UConn's going to enter a conference that is going to be smaller. There's going to be 20 games. You're going to play everybody home and away, which I think is great. And it's not going to be everything that the original Big East was, but it's going to be a lot closer to that than what we've seen. So it's not perfect. It's not a perfect replication of the UConn of old, but it's going to be pretty close. And most importantly, you're going to have that tournament in Madison Square Garden, which is where UConn wants to be.
Absolutely. And I think that 20-game schedule is going to be a lot of fun, too. Being able to play every single team at home, great for marketing, great for ticket sales, and then being able to challenge yourself, play every team on the road as well, great for strength of schedule, that whole net ranking, all the analytics that the selection committee uses nowadays on Selection Sunday. Now, Dom, you talked about this a couple minutes ago, geographic impact of playing in the Big East. Can you tell me a little bit more about what it means for UConn to be back in a conference that just makes so much more sense geographically, both for recruiting and also logistically in terms of travel and road trips?
Well, it's going to save a lot of money on traveling, and that's going to be especially important now because the athletic department's going to take a big hit from the coronavirus shutdowns. They're not going to get all the money that they would normally get from the NCAA tournament because it wasn't played. So they're going to save money on travel. That's first of all. I think it's going to be much easier in terms of wear and tear on the students to be maybe getting on a bus, coming home by bus from Providence or New York or Newark or Philadelphia, as opposed to having to fly across time zones more than 1,000 miles again and again and again. There's only a couple of those trips in the Big East, Creighton and I guess Marquette. So the travel is going to be much easier financially and in terms of wear and tear, and it just makes more sense for the fans in Connecticut. These are the teams that fans in Connecticut want to see. That they just as you mentioned a few minutes ago, Matt. Nobody knows Tulane, nobody knows Tulsa, nobody knows Central Florida or even Wichita State. I mean, they know of them, but those schools just don't resonate in Connecticut among fans. And even though they're good teams, and the league was much better, in terms of competition than people thought. People in Connecticut, it just wasn't, it just didn't turn fans on the way UConn Georgetown, UConn St. John's, UConn Villanova, UConn Providence is going to turn them on.
And I think that it's also turning recruits on. We've seen it already. A guy like RJ Cole transfers from Howard after his sophomore season. to come play in the Big East. A New Jersey kid, he wants to play up here. He doesn't want to play against the Tulanes and the SMUs where it's going to be harder for his family to get to games. The impacts really just resonate and they go on. And it's going to be a lot easier for reporters like you who travel to every road game. So that's exciting as well. Now, Matt, I want to get into the film that you've watched. The Huskies faced two future opponents this year. They had the Xavier loss in double overtime in Charleston that Dom and I were at, as well as an excruciating, as Hurley would say, an excruciating loss, the 61-55 loss in Philadelphia to Villanova. Now, Coach Hurley also saw Providence every year while at URI, and his Rams beat Creighton in the tournament in 2017. Plus, Hurley's a Seton Hall grad, so he definitely has some familiarity with that program. So the coaching staff has some familiarity with the opponents. They've begun scouting already, but I want to hear some of the big takeaways you have from your film study.
Yeah, I think just immediately the biggest takeaway is just UConn is ready to compete in the Big East and is ready for, some people say, is the Big East that much of a big step up from the American? It is. The American, it got better, but the Big East is still a step up. And are they ready for that competition? They are. You look at that, like you said, that Xavier game. That was a heartbreaking loss, especially, they're up 5 points with a minute and a half left. Marshall hits a deep three to send it to OT, and then in double OT, you take a bad on the floor foul to send them to shoot free throws to win the game. But you look at it, Xavier was ranked 18th at the time. That game was close. UConn fought till the very end with 3 players fouling out. And then, like you said, Villanova. They had a 3-year contract playing Villanova. Villanova came to the XL Center and blew the doors off UConn by 20 points. The next year, they played at MSG, a neutral site. And again, it was close in the first half. And then Villanova again blew the doors off UConn by more than 20 points. Now UConn travels into Philadelphia, and all of a sudden UConn is playing pretty well. And it just shows that they're ready for this type of competition. Especially again, they were up in that game towards the end, and then what happened? Unfortunately, we saw it way too many times this season. The offense stalled, the defense couldn't get a stop. Bad turnovers, and then unfortunately you lose the game. But it just shows UConn's ready, and if they can fix these mental mistakes, which they will, and you could really see that they're going to be ready for this conference. Like you said, Hurley has some history playing against Ed Cooley's Providence Friars. That's going to be huge because Providence actually went on a roll towards the end of the season and proved that they could be a good team. Those are going to be already some electric games with how close you are. Fans are already excited about that. And then on top of that, Hurley versus Cooley, their players are going to want to play for their coaches to win this game because they have their own little rivalry going on. And then obviously, like you said, playing Seton Hall, Hurley, played there for a season. And anytime you play the Hall, it's just going to be exciting. But I think, the fans are going to be up for that, and Hurley's going to be up for that.
If I would add, I would add to that, that the biggest challenge for UConn in this conference is going to be the top to bottom strength of the conference, which is what the American didn't have. In the American, there were a handful of teams that UConn seemingly could never beat, such as Cincinnati, at Cincinnati, or at Tulsa, at Houston, at SMU. But there are also the teams at the bottom of the conference that UConn never lost to. They never lost to Tulane. They lost only once to East Carolina. They only lost a couple of times to South Florida. There were some easy wins in the American that offset the other games. But in the Big East, I think top to bottom, 1 through 10, they're going to be very tough opponents. And UConn is going to have to play night after night after night the way they played the last 12 games of this past season. They're going to have to bring that every night in the Big East. And that's going to be the challenge for them, I think, next year.
Right. And just to add on to that, Dom, like you said, 1 through 10 or now 1 through 11, it's really strong. And you see, watching the Big East, I know I watched a lot of it this past season. Any team can beat any team. Creighton came into Carnesecca Arena and St. John's beat them by 20. Obviously, not that that's going to be happening every night, but strength of schedule. All these teams are, top of, or most of them are in the top of the Ken Pom, things like that. They're all going to be super strong.
And Dom, something you touched on was consistency. For the last 12 games, UConn played with a certain level of toughness and consistency that Coach Hurley's going to demand every single game next year. Because if they don't have that in conference schedule, they're going to put up a 6-14 record. There's not going to be the cupcake games that they had this year. And so what this offseason is all about, I think, is about mental toughness. It's about James Bouknight developing that sense of, you know what, if I have the ball in my hands, I can go to the basket and score on anybody. It's going to be about Brendan Adams developing a confidence on the offensive and defensive end to stick with a 4, to stick with a 2, and to hit a crucial 3 when he needs to. And it's going to be about the team putting it all together game in and game out, because there's going to be no cupcake games.
So yeah, there are going to be no easy games. The 20 conference games means two fewer mid majors on the schedule, so they're going to have to be ready to play and ready early. And I think the one thing though is that this team is going to have an awful lot of depth next year with the guys they have coming in, added to the guys who are coming back. And if the NCAA votes to allow transfers without sitting, so that Tyrese Martin and maybe whatever other transfer they get is able to play next year, it's going to be a very, very, very deep UConn team, and that bodes well for playing the way Dan Hurley wants to play, which is relentless defense for 40 minutes.
Right, and something that went away this year as injuries piled up was the full court press, which worked really well early in the season. It sort of showed that, oh, okay, the Huskies are kind of feisty. They score a basket and they're not just going to go play half court defense. They're going to full court press, force some turnovers. Now the Big East, a couple teams that really are going to stand out next year: Villanova and Creighton. In some early preseason rankings, they were ranked 1 and 2. Plus, you factor in a Butler team that's super strong. Marquette lost Marcus Howard, but they're still going to be good. They're always a good program. This league is it's loaded. Georgetown's probably not going to continue to have down years, so it's going to be exciting. So, Dom, I want to get back to you. I do want to hear some predictions, and we'll start with, who do you think is going to win the regular season?
Well, I would say Villanova would be the favorite for me because of what they've done year in and year out, and they're probably gonna play better than you even think they are on paper because that's Jay Wright's mo. It's his track record, and they always have a program with a lot of guys who stay in it. So they're probably going to have some experience, and I would think they would be. They're the team to beat. They're the team that's done what UConn did in the old Big East. They've come out of this league and won national championships. Two in 3 years. So I think they're going to be a team to beat. After that, as you mentioned, Creighton obviously is bringing a lot back, and they had a really good team. And the other teams, it's going to be a wait and see kind of thing. But you just know by reputation, they're always strong. Now, I think UConn is going to have its work cut out, but I think they have the talent to be up in that lead pack, if not at the top.
Yeah, I'm actually going to ask you about that right now. Where do you think UConn's going to land in the standings?
I think they could be top four. I think they could be fourth, maybe fifth, if things really break right and come together. Maybe even third. But I think UConn should enter this league as one of the better teams in it. As you mentioned, there aren't going to be any pushovers. Georgetown will always be tough. Providence will always be tough. St. John's, I think, is made a good hire in Anderson. I think they're going to be better. There aren't going to be any easy games, but I think UConn has a chance with what they've got coming in, particularly, and if transfers are able to play, meaning Tyrese Martin can play, then I think UConn could easily be one of the top four teams in the league.
Can you tell me what you think the ceiling is for UConn? And then on the flip side, maybe transfers aren't allowed to play immediately, or maybe a Cook doesn't come back for a while. What's the worst case scenario? So ceiling and worst case scenario.
Well, I mean, the ceiling is if you get a Cook back, let's say at midseason, and their transfers are able to play, then they may have a problem of having not enough minutes to keep everybody happy. But that's a problem I think Dan Hurley can manage. I think they could be a tournament team, and I think they can win a game or two in the tournament if all that breaks right. Now, if a Cook is not able to come back, and there are issues maybe with Tyler Polley's recovery, and they have two transfers sitting because they're not eligible, now you're down to 8 or 9 guys, and that's knowing nothing about Javante Brown Ferguson what he can do until he gets here. It's not even being 100% sure what Richie Springs can do or what or what Andre Jackson can do. So depth could be a problem if they end up with two sit out transfers and the two guys coming back from major surgery. If there's a setback, depth could be a real problem. But if all those things break the other way, and they get a grad transfer or they get another sit out transfer, but there are no sit out transfers, and then you've got a Cook back mid-season. Tyler Polley's ready to hit the ground running from the start of the season. Then you've got a pretty deep and pretty loaded team.
Absolutely. I think that it's going to be interesting to see how that roster shakes out. Obviously, some big losses from this past year, most notably Christian Vital, who really played at an all-conference level the last 6 to 8 weeks. And they're going to miss his leadership, quite honestly, which is something that at the beginning of the season or that's at any point last season, you never would have said UConn's going to miss Christian Vital's leadership. But they do still have one scholarship to fill. Do you think they're going to look for a grad transfer, a sit-out transfer, or a non-sit-out transfer, a JUCO, or maybe a 2020 reclass like Sonogo?
Yeah, I think all of the above are on the table. Certainly, Sonogo would be too hard to pass up if he reclassified and really expressed that he wanted to play for UConn. The grad transfers, it seems like they lost out on some of the ones that they were really after, but it doesn't mean that someone's not going to jump in that portal yet that might interest them. But I think their focus is going to be on someone who could play right away. If they take another sit-out transfer, it means that they would be pretty confident that they're going to end up playing. So you might see them just kind of wait, hedge their bet until the NCAA makes its preliminary vote later this month. And if that goes a certain way, then maybe they jump on a sit-out transfer because they feel he can play right away. But I really think they need someone who can play right away, and whether that's a Sonogo, whether it's a JUCO guy, or whether it's a grad transfer that may be settling for one that's not quite up to the level of the ones that they went after earlier. I think that would be their focus. It would be to have somebody right away rather than two people sitting out.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think a grad transfer could be sort of best case scenario because you get them for 1 year. It's a body, you know what their reputation is. And then, if they produce, great. And if they don't produce, well, you're only stuck with them for 1 year. And by that point, it's going to be a year into the Big East. Hurley's going to have his fingerprints that much more on the Northeast recruiting trail. So we'll be interested. It'll be very interesting to see what happens. Like you said, preliminary vote later this month, and then official vote, I think, middle of May, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's May 20.
Yeah, May 20. If the grad transfer was Jordan Bruner, you'd be great. But that I don't know if there's another Jordan Bruner out there yet.
Right. All right, guys, we're going to move into our last section. This is going to be a rapid fire section. So we're going to fire through some questions. You guys are going to be tasked with answering them as quickly, as short as possible. First one is for both of you, but we're going to start with Matt. Matt, will UConn crack the top 25 this year? And if so, will they finish in the top 25?
Crack the top 25, yes. I feel like it'd be definitely be a disappointment if they didn't in year 3 for Hurley. Finish there, I think a lot of things will have to go right. So maybe, hard maybe.
I think yes and yes. I think they will crack it early in the season, and I think once they start playing, I think you're going to see Hurley teams really come on, play their best ball at the end of the season, like they did this past year. So I think once they get there, I think they're going to stay there.
Biggest X factor for getting into the top 25 is going to be that non-conference schedule. 2 fewer non-conference games than this past year. In this past year, they had a loss to St. Joe's. That was just a brutal loss. They had a loss to Indiana, which really should have or could have been a win. So this year with this non-conference schedule coming up, which is going to be a good one, at Florida, they got the tournament in Brooklyn with USC, Vanderbilt, Notre Dame. There's going to be some good opportunities for some quality wins. Next question for Dom. Dom, I think I know the answer to this from your appearance on Jared Coulter's podcast, but what city are you most excited to cover games in?
Well, I'm a Chicago guy. My years covering the Giants. I went there many times. My years covering the Yankees, I went there many times. So I'm a Chicago guy. I got to go to one game against DePaul when they played out there. But yeah, I'm looking forward to going back to Chicago. That's my kind of town, as the song would say.
All right, I like that. Definitely will consider that when we're selecting our travel trips with UCTV next year. Now, Matt, you're next. Which home game do you think is going to have the best atmosphere? This year, I think it was probably Houston. Florida was up there in the early non-conference season.
It's Villanova. They're going to be in the top five. They're always going to be good. And Tyler Pollard recently said it to Eric Galicchio that that's who he's most looking forward to playing, just because, well, they're Villanova. So
I think the relationship between Coach Hurley and Jay Wright is also a great one. It's an intense relationship. Those are two fierce competitors, two of the best coaches, not only in the Northeast, but in the whole country, honestly. Jay Wright just named the coach of the decade. So that game, fans are going to mark their calendar. Hopefully they get it at Gamble. Now, obviously, a packed XL Center is special, but for students, Gamble just that much better. Dom, little bit of a modification on that question. Which team should UConn fans be most excited to see the Huskies play, not just at home, but being able to play twice a year, so include the road factor?
Well, I think it's got to be Villanova there too. It has to be because not only are they close by, they're close enough for UConn fans to get to, but they're the bullies on the block. They're the big kids on the block. They've won national championships twice recently, and UConn, obviously UConn's won four times. The last one in 14. They won what in 16 and 18. I mean that's the heavyweight matchup right now. I mean the other schools, there's history with them, and certainly Providence, which has been very good lately. That's going to be a bigger rivalry now than it was the first go around in the Big East. But I think UConn Villanova is going to be the Ali Frazier of these early years with UConn back in the Big East.
It was a pretty good crowd at that game at Wells Fargo in mid-January. I actually went to that with my dad. Good atmosphere. The Villanova crowd was silent for the majority of the first 36 or 37 minutes, and there was a good contingent of Husky Nation that made their way down to Philadelphia. Matt, back to you. What is going to be the single biggest X factor for this team next season?
it's going to be the bigs. There's a lot of, to try to answer it simple, though, there's a lot of question marks. Can Carlton get back to playing like he did sophomore year? They don't really know what they're going to get out of Javonte Brown-Ferguson. He does a 7'5" wingspan, but he's going to be 17 when he gets to campus. Can they get someone who's going to be immediately eligible to help fill in, whether it's grad transfer or anything else? Is a Cook going to be the same if and when he comes back during the season? So that's going to be the biggest X factor, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Dom, do you want to touch on that one?
Yeah, I think RJ Cole is an X factor. Now I know we're all kind of counting on him being what everybody thinks he could be. He was the player of the year in his conference as a sophomore, and I know that Dan Hurley has a lot of confidence in him and has been talking for a year about the impact that he's going to have when he comes in. But I think that when he starts playing, it's so important that he be everything that they think he's going to be, everything that they expect him to be. And I know he does need some work on the defensive side. Dan has said that much many times. And if you need work on the defensive side, it's hard to stay on the court. So it, the one thing UConn cannot afford is for him to be a bust. So I think RJ Cole playing up to expectations is really going to be an X factor for UConn.
And Dom, if I can just jump in and ask you a quick question about RJ.
Yeah.
All signs are kind of pointing that he's going to be having that starting spot, right?
Yep. Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that.
So, Dom, does that push Jalen out of the lineup, or do they go three guards with Gaffney, Bouknight, and RJ?
I think three guards. Yeah, I think they go that way. That would be my guess.
Yeah, I think that'd be good. I mean, obviously their four guard set with Whaley at the 5 this year was their most productive offensively. So if Bouknight's defense can step up, if RJ can play up to the offensive level and maybe compete defensively at least, that three guard set could be deadly because Gaffney's assist to turnover ratio through the roof, and he's just such a steady presence out there. Last rapid fire question, Dom, this one's just for you. You touched on this earlier, but I want to hear a finite answer. Will the Huskies make the NCAA tournament? And if yes, how far do you see them going?
I say yes, and I'm going to say the round of 32 to keep it. I think they get in and win one game, and that's kind of their little taste of what's to come. Sweet 16 would be a great season, and I think if they don't make it, I think it would be a big disappointment. So I see them as a tournament team, as they may very well have been a tournament team this time around if they got to Sunday, if the AAC tournament was played. So I say yes, tournament team, and I think they win at least one game when they get there.
I think that would be a satisfactory season for sure. Like you said, Sweet 16 would be marvelous, and not making the tournament would be, quite frankly, a disappointment. It's been much too long for UConn. Now, guys, before we wrap up, I want to open the floor to any final comments from you guys. I know I wrote the script, so I left. I might have omitted some big topics that we should have talked about.
Well, I think I would just wrap it up by saying that virtually everything that we've said here, these last 35 or so minutes, is really contingent upon what kind of a summer uh, UConn's going to have in all schools. You know, the more unusual the circumstances, the more that's an equalizer and brings random results. So I think so much of what UConn is doing, particularly the momentum with which they finished last season, really depends on them getting on campus and getting into the gym by pretty much the normal time in June and having a regular summer to work. If that's truncated and they're not able to get on campus until September, or maybe if the season doesn't start on time, if this carries on that long, I think that might really hurt a lot of the momentum that UConn's built up. So I think very much everything is so, like everything else in our world right now, guys. Everything's really up in the air.
Right. Just my only closing thing from a student perspective is just, again, just to reiterate how really ecstatic I am just to see. I know for the Houston game, the student section was literally filled to the top an hour before the game, and I'm ready. I'm just so ready for that to be a regular thing again, and for just Gamble and XL to be sold out as a regular thing again. That'd be my last comment.
Absolutely, to both of you guys. Thank you so much for joining the podcast today, and thank you to the listeners for sticking with us through the end. Dom, I want to say a special thank you to you. You've been such a valuable asset to so many of our members this year and for years past, and I can't wait until we're back working together alongside each other in person sooner than later once everything returns back to normal.
Yeah, let's hope. Let's think good thoughts, guys.
Absolutely. So on our next episode, we hope to be joined by another special guest, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, we'll be posting lots of content on Twitter and Instagram at UCTV Sports, including a bracket of the best plays from the men's team this past season. Now, for Dom Amore and Matt Goepfert, I'm Noam Watt. Thanks for tuning into the Students of Storrs podcast. Stay healthy, and we'll see you next time.